Senate Chair of the Transportation Committee, Joe Boncari, and Boston City Councilor Lydia Edwards. Before I get into some of the details on why we're here today, I do want to give my daily update on what's going on with respect to tests and hospitalizations. Yesterday there were about 4,900 tests that were reported, which brings the total amount of tests done here in the Commonwealth to just over 545,000. The average test positive rate over the course of the past week has been about 8.6%, which is down from the 20 or 30% positive test rate we saw back in April. On hospitalizations, we have about 2,100 cases currently hospitalized. That number has also continued to trend downward in the right direction over the course of the past few weeks. These numbers show steady progress, and we're going to continue to carefully monitor them as we work toward a phased reopening of the Commonwealth's economy. As we've said before, that public health data will guide our reopening process. 2 days ago on May 25th, the Commonwealth opened the rest of what we would call the Phase 1 businesses, such as barbershops and curbside retail. Having businesses reopen and seeing workers getting back to a new routine is, of course, for all of us, incredibly encouraging. And over the next few days, we'll continue to monitor the public health trends and the data trends to see if they change. And we'll continue to closely monitor all of that data, as well as some of the work we're currently doing with respect to hotspot location testing to see if any of the trends change there as well. Everybody obviously has an important role to play in this process. As I've said many times over the course of the past few months, please continue to do your part. Social distancing, wear a face covering wherever you can, and practice good hygiene. Practicing good hygiene in this particular location is probably a little more complicated than it is in some of the others. Today we got an opportunity to take a closer look at some of the work that's being done on an accelerated basis on the Blue Line. I think, as everybody knows, our administration is currently implementing an $8 billion plan to invest in a faster, safer, and more reliable MBTA, ultimately replacing 400 red and orange line cars, modernizing stations, and upgrading track, signals, and other key infrastructure across the system. Last year, the T executed on a plan to expedite several infrastructure projects across the red, orange, and green lines to help deliver better service to customers. That work resulted in the MBTA delivering those projects about 2 years faster than they would have originally been delivered using traditional processes. We outlined Phase 2 of this accelerated work back in February, and our plans were designed to pursue further accelerated work into 2020. One of those projects was actually this track and infrastructure work on the Blue Line, which was originally scheduled to be accomplished through a series of weekend diversions, maybe 12 or 14 weekend diversions later this year. The impact of COVID-19 on ridership and on traffic made it possible, along with legislation that was championed by Speaker DeLeo, Senator Boncari, and other folks in the legislature, made it possible for the T to engage in a very quick pivot and bump this work forward to now take advantage of the low ridership numbers, the low traffic on roadways, and to use shuttle buses that can move people pretty quickly from Maverick to the other side of the harbor and back. This 14-day diversion is taking place between Bowdoin and Airport stations, began on Monday, May 18th, and is scheduled to wrap up on Sunday, May 31st. During this time, the T plans to replace 2,200 feet of track between Maverick and Aquarium, which will help remove a long-standing speed restriction between the two stations, install a new truck pad near the airport station, relocate a fire standpipe, which is over there, which we've been talking about, between Maverick and Aquarium, and complete harbor tunnel leak mitigation and drainage work between Maverick and Aquarium that will reduce the water and leak-related service delays and improve overall system reliability. The harbor tunnel, which runs between Aquarium and Maverick, passes under the Boston Harbor and is obviously susceptible to flooding during storm surges. These infrastructure upgrades will improve flood resilience and prevent water leaks and corrosion, ultimately preventing water-related Blue Line delays and improve travel times for riders on the Blue Line. So far, all of the 2,200 feet of track have been replaced. 40 fare gates were overhauled at the airport, Maverick, Bowdoin, and Aquarium stations. Over 2,200 feet of old fire standpipes were demolished, and over 1,800 feet of pipe at this point have been replaced. By diverting this part of the Blue Line for 2 weeks, this work will be finished more than 2 months sooner than previously anticipated. Sections of the track between Bowdoin and airport stations are also currently being scheduled to close in August of 2020 for additional work on harbor tunnel improvements. And we know that while ridership has been down significantly across the system, the Blue Line transports many of our essential workers each day. So to ensure there's still enough service on the Blue Line, the T's been running shuttle buses between Bowdoin and airport stations since May 18th. These local shuttles operate between airport and Bowdoin, as well as direct shuttles running between airport and government center. In addition to replacing service with shuttles, the Fiscal and Management Control Board voted to grant Lynn commuter rail service on the Newburyport and Rockport line temporary Zone A 1A fare status beginning on May 22nd and also running through May 31st. This provides another travel option for riders that typically transfer to the Blue Line at Wonderland Station and additional North Shore customers affected by the temporary Blue Line shutdown who travel to and from downtown Boston. This will also help promote social distancing by easing crowding on board both area bus routes and the Blue Line. The T also recently pursued accelerating already scheduled work on the Lowell commuter rail line to take advantage of the low ridership numbers on that line. And from May 18th to May 24th, the T closed the Lowell commuter rail line between Anderson and North Station to support construction of the Green Line extension project, which has been going on now for a couple of years. This work was previously scheduled to be accomplished through a series of weekend diversions later this year. And the T will continue to review other opportunities where accelerated work might be possible due to low ridership and less traffic at this time. And since the beginning of this pandemic, the T's moved quickly to protect both its employees and its riders with respect to COVID. The T stepped up their cleaning protocols by increasing the cleaning and disinfection of vehicles. All high contact areas at subway stations, handrails, fare gates, and fare vending machines have been cleaned regularly and often. The T's also implemented rear door boarding on buses and street level trolley stops to protect drivers. The T also launched a public messaging campaign in stations as well, reminding riders to ride safe and ride safer and wear a mask or a face covering while using the MBTA. And as we turn to reopening, we know that public transportation will play an important role in making sure people are able to get to where they need to go. 2 weeks ago, we announced a list of over 50 employers representing about 150,000 employees in Greater Boston who've committed to having significant portions of their workforce working remotely for the rest of the spring, and in some cases beyond that. In the executive branch, we've also extended our telework and remote working guidance for employees already working from home until further notice. We know that some employees will need to get to their workplaces for a fixed start time each day, and for others, telework is simply not an option. But for the rest, we're asking employers to continue to consider having employees who can successfully work from home continue to work from home. Buses, ferries, and trains are unique environments. Fighting the virus in these settings is only possible through shared responsibility. Riders and transit officials both have jobs to do. Secretary Pollack and General Manager Poftak will both speak in a few minutes about other efforts that are underway across our transportation agencies to support the fight against COVID-19 and the T's plans for service going forward. But before I talk about that, I would like to recognize the men and women of the T for their work during this very difficult time. The T's continued to run every single day throughout COVID-19 and the outbreak that began back in March. And the conductors, drivers, engineers, and maintenance workers have continued to show up each and every day. Providing public transportation is an essential service, and they have all helped support the movement of other essential workers across the Commonwealth who, like many who are here today, are leaving their homes and families while we're asking most folks to stay home. We're extremely grateful for everything that our essential transportation workers have done to keep the T running throughout this very difficult time in this pandemic. The one other thing I want to say, and I notice that every time I come to one of these extended stay work sites, is how obvious it should be what a difference it makes when you can buy yourself a significant amount of time on a particular location to pursue a big project. I mean, as you just look around at all of the gear and the raw material that is sitting here and can continue to sit here and has been sitting here since May 18th, imagine trying to do this where you literally had to do it at night, where you would bring a bunch of this stuff in from either Maverick or aquarium or airport, depending upon where you could actually get it in. You bring it in, you get a few hours of work done, and then you'd have to pack it all up and move it out. That was one of the reasons why we created those weekend events starting last year, to at least get the time from, you know, sort of 9 o'clock on a Friday night to 6 o'clock on a Monday morning, so that people could do a significant amount of work on a continual basis without interruption at many of those locations on the other lines. This one, by having these 14 days to actually focus here, the amount of gear and the amount of work and the amount of material that could be brought in and taken out over that period of time, and treat this like a real workstation throughout this period, and at the same time continue to deliver what we might describe as rapid transit at a particular, from particular stops here over to the other side of the harbor, was an exceptional opportunity, and I give the T enormous credit for chasing this. But again, I want to say that without the legislation that was passed and championed by folks like Speaker DeLeo, it simply wouldn't have been possible to get this done. And with that, I will turn it over to Secretary Pollack.
Good day, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here today to see firsthand some of the accelerated investments being made in the MBTA subway system. Strengthening the Commonwealth's transportation system in ways that increase safety and reliability has been and will continue to be a key focus of the Baker-Polito administration. As many of you know, during fiscal year 2019, the T, for the first time, invested over $1 billion in capital projects, the most ever in a single year. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, some people might think the T will not be able to do as much in fiscal 20, which ends at the end of June. In fact, the MBTA expects to exceed its spending goal of $1.4 billion this fiscal year, which would represent a massive increase over fiscal 2019 and more than doubling the amount invested in maintenance and modernization from less than 5 years ago. Closing parts of the T to accelerate repairs and modernization, as is happening here on the Blue Line, is something the T had already been planning for 2020 and will be happening later in this summer on the Green Line as well as planned. MassDOT's Highway Division is similarly hard at work with employees and contractors following new sanitation, face covering, and physical distancing guidelines as they continue maintenance work, paving roads, repairing bridges, responding to traffic incidents, designing projects, inspecting assets, mowing the grass, and fixing potholes. While work practices have changed, the hard work being done by the men and women of the MBTA and MassDOT has not. Now, life as we know it has changed in many ways, but what hasn't changed is the need for a good transportation system that functions well, one that is safe, reliable, resilient, sustainable, and equitable. We are, however, expecting to see ongoing changes both in how people travel and, related to that, how people work. And those changes will necessarily change the work of MassDOT and the MBTA. As the governor mentioned, we hope and expect that telecommuting will continue, as many employers have found that work from home has been a successful strategy, and many employees, as we've heard in recent polling data, prefer to work at home at least some of the time. Having state and private sector employees continue to work from home can help the MBTA from becoming undesirably overcrowded, and can also help keep cars off of our roads as traffic comes back. In fact, it will take all of us working together to make sure that the transportation system remains safe and reliable as we reopen the economy and adjust to our new normal. MassDOT and the T will need to keep our employees and our customers safe. Employers need to work with us to gradually bring workers back, especially here in the city of Boston and in the urban core, and consider options, not just work at home, but like staggered start times that can further ensure that both the T and the highway network can handle the growing demand. Cities and towns can work with each other and with us to ensure that there are safe spaces for everyone, whether they are driving, bicycling, walking, or using the T, including more lanes for MBTA buses. Drivers need to consider traveling at off-peak times and need to fight the urge to speed while the roads remain relatively wide open. MBTA passengers need to do their part by covering their faces and practicing social distancing. And everyone needs to stay home if they're feeling sick. So if we all do our part, it's not just projects like this, but literally hundreds of projects that are going on around the Commonwealth by both MassDOT and the T that can succeed in fixing the transportation system while we have record low levels of transit usage and highway usage. And in closing, I want to note that the work you see today on the Blue Line is a good example of how the MBTA and MassDOT have been collaborating on ways to accelerate maintenance and modernization work and speed MBTA buses on their way. Another example is the bus lanes we've created to shuttle the buses that are replacing the Green Line north of the Charles River while work on the Green Line extension proceeds. This summer, we'll be installing equipment on the State Police ramp in South Boston to allow Silver Line buses to enter the tunnel. We're working on a bus-on-shoulder pilot for later this summer, and we're looking at places on the MassDOT-owned system where we can accommodate HOV or managed lanes or bus lanes. By working together, MassDOT and the T can help deliver enough of a supply of transit to allow riders to have a reliable, socially distanced system. And I'm going to turn the podium over to the general manager to speak about the things the T will be doing to increase transit service and keep our riders and employees safe. In closing, like the governor, I just want to thank the men and women of the MBTA and of our contractors who are working here today for all the great work that you've been doing and will continue to do, both operating the system every day and fixing it for our future. Thank you.
On behalf of everyone at the MBTA, I want to express my appreciation to Governor Baker, Secretary Pollack, Speaker DeLeo, Chairman Boncory, and Councilor Edwards for joining us here today. I also want to thank the work crews that are performing the work all along the Blue Line here. Thank you for all your hard work. In particular, I want to thank a couple specific departments: maintenance of way, signals, fare transformation, power, security, capital programs, customer experience, and operations. This has been a huge choreography across the entire MBTA to be able to get this work done, and I'm really thankful for the team that we have here. We're about halfway through the 14-day Blue Line shutdown, and we've made great progress. When we're done, work crews will have replaced Blue Line track that will allow us to remove a long-standing speed restriction between Maverick and Aquarium, which will bring a quicker, more reliable commute to Blue Line riders. We're also improving reliability through repair work within the tunnel to reduce water-related service delays. We've installed a new truck pad near airport, which allows us to get supplies in more easily. And we're performing station improvements, such as replacing signage in certain areas, replacing the tactile edging, which you can see over there, and also overhauling fare gates. This work is part of the T's $8 billion Building a Better T program to make upgrades and improvements at a faster pace. So by accomplishing this Blue Line work during these 14 days, we've completed the work over 2 months sooner than we'd previously planned. We're also doing the work now because of the reduced transit ridership we're seeing across the system as a result of the pandemic, as well as the resulting lower traffic on roadways that allow us to operate the shuttles more efficiently. Right now, ridership within the system is a fraction of what we see during a typical day in May. And we do recognize that increasingly riders will come back as we move through phase 1 of the Commonwealth's reopening plan. We're dedicated to providing essential service to meet the needs of these riders through a phased approach that tracks with the phases within the Commonwealth's broader reopening plan. During phase 1, we will continue to offer the modified service schedule that we have been, which in most cases is about 60% of our regular schedule. We'll also be promoting our Ride Safer campaign to promote social distancing, emphasizing the use of face coverings, and continuing to provide a ramped-up cleaning, disinfection, and decontamination campaign across our vehicles and our facilities. We've also made tremendous progress in supplying personal protective equipment to our employees, and we will continue to do so. Our staff will be monitoring ridership levels and rider behavior during Phase 1 and during all the following phases in order to make targeted adjustments where needed and where feasible. The new normal for the T will very much be dictated by crowding thresholds, and we will continue to monitor this data closely. During Phase 2, service levels across all modes will increase. For instance, on the Blue Line, we will return to a regular service level, we will reintroduce limited ferry service, and we will increase the levels of service on commuter rail as well as on bus. We'll also continue to advance the Ride Safer information campaign for our customers. As we go through Phase 1, I want to close with another reminder to riders that face coverings are required while using the MBTA system, including onboard shuttle buses. I want to thank our riders for doing the right thing and wearing these face coverings to protect themselves, their families, and the families and loved ones of our employees. We at the MBTA very much appreciate the understanding of our riders and the public as we continue to work to provide transportation for those who need it. Thank you again for joining us today, and I will now hand it back to Governor Baker.
Questions for any of us?
Can you explain to people how to ensure social distancing on something like a subway car? And if in fact that happens, how that wouldn't cause crowding of the platform?
Well, I think the most important thing that'll need to be done here is ensure that people, in some ways, play their part. As both the Secretary and the General Manager said, it's going to be very important for people to recognize and understand that they have a role to play in distancing. And our role is to continue to disinfect and clean the system, particularly the high-touch areas, as often as possible. A lot of signage and messaging, I'm sure, will be part of this as well. And to do what we need to do to make sure people understand what's expected of them.
Will there be seats roped off or X's on empty seats, that kind of thing?
You guys want to speak to that?
What's it going to look like?
What we introduced last week was the concept of crowding thresholds, which we will be tracking. What we've done is taken a standard that is based on the World Health Organization standard for distance between folks on a vehicle, and we've put in place a crowding threshold where we will track according to that crowding threshold. Our old service delivery policy used to consider a bus with 58 people on it to be crowded. We will now consider a bus with 20 people on it to be crowded. We will track that. We will, to the extent feasible, we will attempt to provide additional service where we can. We're also working to spread out demand. As both the Governor and the Secretary talked about, we are working with employers to attempt to spread out demand so that we can serve people in a way that will permit social distancing where feasible, and again, also requiring face coverings in situations where it may not be.
But is there anyone in real time who's going to enforce this? I mean, if there is a crowded subway car and a crowded bus, is there anyone who's going to say, okay, folks, we can't let any more people on? Or how does that work?
Right now, what we're attempting to do is provide as much supply as possible and spread out the demand. I don't consider it feasible to do that, particularly on the rail system. We are exploring ways that we can communicate with our riders with information about levels of crowding or periods where there are crowding, so folks who do have the opportunity to take a ride at a different time or to use a different mode have the ability to take advantage of that. And, that's something that, we've had a very active discussion. I know particularly the Secretary and the Governor have also been very active in putting together a coalition of business groups that are going to continue working from home, promoting staggered schedules, promoting intermittent work from home. So that's a very active conversation with a number of groups in the business community.
Do you plan to have people on the additional employees on the platforms monitoring and helping people get on and off the train?
To the extent that we have the availability of that workforce to do it, we will do that. I think our hope is that people will continue, where possible, to work from home, and also that we're able to communicate with our customers about periods of time where crowding is being experienced. The other thing we're taking a look at is the potential where we might have two overlapping modes, one with capacity, one without. Could we induce folks to shift mode? Part of the second week of this project itself, we are offering folks who want to take the commuter rail in Lynn the opportunity to show their Charlie card and take the Lynn commuter rail. We have plenty of capacity on the Lynn commuter rail. We're looking to see, does it provide a decrease in ridership on the buses serving that station, and also those buses that connect with the Blue Line? Will it decrease the amount of folks on shuttle buses?
Why don't you until phase 3 to return to normal weekday service? Why not do it sooner and just provide the maximum amount of space?
Right now, we're providing about 60% of our regular schedule, and we're seeing, depending on the mode, anywhere from 3% to 24% of our usual ridership. So I would say in general, we have enough capacity on the system right now. One of the things we track very carefully and use the new crowding thresholds to track is places where there is crowding on specific buses and lines. And in many cases, we have been able to provide additional supply to address crowding issues.
But if you have the funding to do full service, why not just do it to sort of maximize the amount of capacity?
Part of the issue for us has been workforce availability. As of last week, we had almost 400 employees who were out on some type of COVID-19 related leave. We've had 150 employees who have tested positive for COVID-19. So part of the issue for us is getting the workforce back, getting them back healthy, and then providing that service. So there's also an element of workforce availability that is a constraint.
Steve, on your crowding standards, you use the World Health Organization in 3 feet. The governor's often talking about 6 feet. So why the difference? Why the different crowding?
I think part of it is the face covering requirement. Face coverings are intended for use where social distancing isn't possible. And we felt this standard also tracked with what most other systems across, we've looked at SEPTA and WMATA and CTA, tracks pretty closely with what other systems are doing across the country.
What are you guys doing for right now? There has been cases of overcrowding in East Boston and Chelsea, where a lot of the buses, my colleague did a report last week on it. So what are you guys doing for those areas that people can actually work from home and they have to use those services? So what are you guys doing now instead of waiting for those spaces to start?
Where possible, we're attempting to deploy additional service. This picture, the picture that I believe you're referring to is
She actually rode the bus and she was around, and there was several instances of overcrowding in some of the high peak areas or times.
Yep.
So what are you guys doing right now to solve those issues for people? Where we see that East Boston and Chelsea are some of the cities that have been more highly impacted by that.
where possible, we're deploying additional service. The particular bus that you may or may not be referring to, but the picture circulated widely, we were actually able to add an additional bus that day, the next day, in order to try to address that situation.
Follow up on that, though. When you have that overcrowding situation, how do you enforce 3 feet, 6 feet social distancing, masks, and pull people off the bus? Do you limit the amount of people allowed on the bus? How do you do that?
I think that is something we're exploring, different ways to address that. One of our concerns around sort of that enforcement regime that you talked about is some really important equity issues in terms of how do you determine who gets pulled off a bus or doesn't get pulled off a bus. So I think, we've certainly seen other systems have been challenged to do this as well. So it is something we're looking at. Could we potentially have buses bypass stops when they are full? There's some important operational considerations there, because you may get into a situation where you're bypassing some stops so regularly that the service is not being delivered equitably. So that is part of an ongoing discussion right now. I agree with you.
Last question.
Governor, I have a question about schools reopening. We heard from Jeff Riley yesterday. Do you think it's safe for schools to reopen in the fall? Is there a safe way to do it for both the teachers and the students?
So, first of all, the there are schools all over the world that are open, okay? And while I certainly think a lot of those school systems and school districts and countries have done some pretty clever and imaginative things, I certainly believe we have the ability here to do imaginative and creative things that are safe for kids and faculty and administrators as well. I think the goal at this point, Jeff has a fairly large, Commissioner Riley has a fairly large team that he's put together that represents a lot of points of view to start working through this issue. But I feel terrible, and I know almost everybody does, about how much school our kids lost as a result of this pandemic. And I think we all believe that it's critically important that we do all we can to make sure they don't lose another half year or, God forbid, longer than that. This is an especially important issue, to get back to the issue you raised, Steve, about equity. And I said this when we talked about this during the original decision to make the decision to close schools for the rest of the year. There are a lot of kids for whom school is a really important part of their life for reasons that go way beyond academics. And I think we really need to work hard to make sure we come up with a workable plan. Yeah. So we've had numerous conversations with the child care community, with the folks at EEC, and with the folks at DPH and the command center over what a reimagined child care system would look like. And I expect that we'll have a lot more to say on that soon. Because we agree. It's got to be part of the game. Yeah. Yep.
I mean, can you give people an idea of what it might look like when, and I realize the plan's still being worked out, but can you give an idea of what it might look like?
The plan is still being worked out, and when we have a little more sort of meat on the bones, we'll have, I mean, look, this isn't the sort of thing that anybody thinks you can present to people on August 20th and think that's, going to be particularly helpful. People know that this is something people need to see and start thinking about and have a chance to kick the tires on sooner rather than later. Yeah.
Bennett Walsh yesterday produced communications that seemed to indicate he made your administration aware of the circumstances at the Soldiers' Home about, I think, 8 days earlier than the response to it. Were you aware of that? And if not, why didn't it filter up through your administration to you?
Well, I've said for a while now, and Alex Morris, who's the mayor in Holyoke, who told the Lieutenant Governor, Secretary Sutters, and me on a Sunday night at the end of March what the story was. But I've said for quite a while that I want to wait and see the results of Mark Pearlstein's investigation. We hired him 2 days after we were made aware of the impending and exploding tragedy there. And there's a lot of back and forth, which is not surprising given the significance of what happened there. But I'm waiting for Mark's report.
Governor,
Thanks, everybody.
Reopening, people are afraid. People are afraid for the kids to go back to school in September. They're afraid to get on the MBTA because they have to go to work. They're afraid to send their kids to daycare. What do you say to people in Massachusetts who are afraid as things are reopening?
We've been basing all of our decisions on guidance and advice that we're getting from our own public health folks, the very strong, world-class medical community we have here in Massachusetts, the information that's come from other countries with respect to how they've been handling some of these issues. They're ahead of us in many cases because they dealt with this virus before we did. And we said all along that the data is going to be the element that drives our decision making. And we said we weren't going to reopen anything until we started to see positive trends for an extended period of time. We didn't open anything until we saw positive trends for an extended period of time. And we're going to continue to follow those trends. And the phased approach that we took to making decisions about how to reopen were based on the guidance and the advice that we got from a lot of the very smart people that work in our administration and the smart people who live in Massachusetts and elsewhere. And I thought at the time that, and I said this, that we would be accused of going too fast by some and too slow by others. And honestly, that's exactly where we seem to have landed. But in the end, you know, the decisions we make are going to be based on guidance, advice, and data.
Governor, what do you think of the 3 feet crowding on the T versus, I mean, I've heard you say so many times, trying to say 6 feet.
Yeah.
Do you think that 3 feet is enough?
Well, I haven't read the guidance that these folks saw from the World Health Organization, so I'd like to look at it before I comment on it. But I do know that there are a bunch of studies that have been done that say that the length of time you spend in a particular place has a lot to do with how big the concern is about transmission. And the other thing people have said is if 2 people are wearing a mask, you can reduce the likelihood of transmission by as much as 80%. I'm guessing those 2 things factor into some of that, but I would like to read the WHO stuff before I comment specifically on it. Thanks.
Everybody.